Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I am so excited to welcome you into this conversation. It's such an amazing, rich, potent conversation that I had with my dear friend Rebecca Mullins. And usually my process is pretty intuitive with regards to which episode to release, when to release it. I don't usually try to air quotes, control it very much. I try to let it just flow and speak to me, speak through me in whatever ways and order that they came to me. Some conversations I actually record way beforehand and then I share at a much later time. And I trust that whenever I feel guided to share the episode is exactly when the episode is supposed to be out. But this conversation is a true exception because the moment that Rebecca and I finished this conversation, I was just kind of, filled with this knowing that this conversation is supposed to be released when the sun is in Scorpio. And I think as you listen to this conversation, it will be really obvious why that is. Just to introduce Rebecca a little bit. So Rebecca and I met in a year-long container that was facilitated by our mutual Reiki mentor, Marika Hamahata Climber, who has also been on this podcast. And I remember the very first time I met Rebecca, it was kind of this experience of like, who are you? You're so magical. I want to get to know you, Like you just can sense when someone in a community that you're currently in has that, when you have a gravitational pull towards someone. And unbeknownst to me, Rebecca and I actually have quite a few mutual friends, including Nicole Franco, who I'm not sure if I met Rebecca or Nicole first, but Nicole was throughout 2021 one of the participants of this astrology learning container that Britton LaRue, my collaborator, and I facilitated. And so we didn't even know about this until much, much later, that Rebecca and Nicole are actually friends and, that there is this beautiful web that Rebecca and I are kind of creating together, that our communities are actually linked up. And so in this conversation, Rebecca shared with such openness and vulnerability the grief portal that she was just moving through with the sudden death of her mother, and how that grief really opened her up to deeper relationships with her son, with her husband, with her sisters, and also with members of her community. And it was an incredible conversation. The wisdom in this conversation is so, so potent. And some of the things I heard during this conversation really moved me to tears. And we also spoke about how Rebecca is an artist. And throughout the program, the Reiki program that we were in together, Rebecca opened up her process, her artistic process, her creative process to co-create with spirit, and how she created what she's calling the Altar Companions collection. And I am so excited for you to listen to that because I feel like there were so many incredible gems there. Okay, so I will share with you Rebecca's bio. Rebecca is a multicultural and multidimensional creatress of small batch jewels, divination tools, and art to activate, align, and reconnect folks to their radiance. It is her belief that the pieces people choose to adorn themselves in and invite into their homes and sacred spaces reflect each individual's kaleidoscopic inner landscape. She aspires to cultivate a timeless and powerful connection between people and her work, one that compels them to live a soul-rich, deeply connected, rooted, and meaningful life. Her body of work is a prayer infused with the highest good for those who welcome her pieces into their orbit. Her wish is for people to be emboldened to show up in their full expression. Rebecca's creative process is ignited and guided by ancestral, human and non-human wisdom, the natural, elemental, and cosmic realms, textures, unique materials, and colorways. Each piece is handmade and sculpted with heart and conscience in her home studio on unceded Anishinaabe land in so-called Grand Rapids, Michigan. When I re-listened to this conversation, what really struck me as so magnificent and so beautiful was the ways that this conversation really is a conversation between two humans, two friends who are going through very human things. Grief is not something that we generally like to talk about or to even feel. And so much of our lives as humans in 2022, or whenever you're listening to this, is revolved around shoving away that pain, around not wanting to sit with the pain, not wanting to sit with the losses. But what Rebecca really taught me in this conversation is how beautiful it is to take in those periods of times and meet with it as the teacher that it is. And I feel really proud that we can have this conversation and that we can hold space in this podcast to discuss these really important topics and to show up in our full humanity as we are discussing them, and that conversations about grief can be deeply resonant, can be deeply eloquent, and also has such potential to make us all feel like we're not alone in this world as humans. I am bowing so deeply to the wisdom that Rebecca brought forth, Rebecca's presence, and just how much this conversation filled me up. So here it is. Here's my conversation with Rebecca Mullins. Welcome to the podcast, Rebecca. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I am so honored, and honestly, I feel like I've been wanting to have you for a while. We were in Foundations of Energetic Ecology together with our mutual teacher and friend, Marika Clymer, and I feel like you have such a powerful presence throughout the container. Basically, that year-long journey of being with you and the rest of the community has felt like such a gift for me. And I'm still unpacking what I learned from that container. And I'm really excited to talk to you today because I've also been admiring your work for a while.
Oh, I love knowing that.
Yeah, I remember, being in Marika's class and meeting everybody and then just knowing, like, I don't know, like I feel something, like I'm like, oh, Rebecca's such a magical person. And then I checked out your work and I was like, oh my goodness, your work is just beyond. So
thank you, Jonathan.
Of course. I'm really excited to talk with you today and to explore both the artist Rebecca and the human Rebecca and the energy worker, energy healer, Rebecca. And
Hmm.
yeah, we'll see where we go.
Yeah, we'll see where we go. We'll follow the little spiral
Yes,
of
exactly.
conversation.
Yes. So I like to begin my conversations in the present moment.
Hmm.
And the question I usually ask all of my guests is, who do you sense, know, or feel yourself to be in this present moment and in this present chapter of your life?
Mm-hmm. So I know that you asked this question, and because I love your podcast and I've been listening for a while. I was really intentional about not trying to like come up with something ahead of time. So I'm going to just check in with myself and see like how that question comes to me. And I immediately get like tender. Tender is like a very a very like constant companion of mine right now, specifically where I am. Tender, and I almost feel like I'm inside out,
Mm.
experiencing vulnerability and rawness, but not in the sense where I feel unprotected. I do feel like there is a container that's outside of me that's protecting me from anything that could activate me in a way that could cause me to spiral in this tenderness. So it feels like a
Mm.
very protected container so that I can move within that space and explore what that feels like.
Yeah.
So tender and vulnerable. I also feel like I'm meeting a new version of myself. And I'm sure we'll go into it at some point with this grief portal that I'm in. I'm meeting these new versions of myself, but also revisiting like parts of my inner child um, that were really confused and very sensitive to people's energies when they were experiencing grief and loss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you
I'm
for
really
sharing
excited
that.
to be here. And just
Yeah.
it's like all of it, but mostly like
Yeah.
a tenderness.
Uh-huh. I really feel um this idea of tender containment. There's something
Mm,
about that that feels so powerful. Like there
mm-hmm,
is something that wants to move through, and it's also a cracking open, and also,
mm-hmm,
something you mentioned about meeting this new version of yourself as you step into, or maybe out of, or in between the grief portal that you're in,
mm-hmm.
feels very potent. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does feel really potent. And, sometimes when I think about tenderness and feeling very like vulnerable and exposed in a way, in the past, it's felt like it was very risky, and there is definitely risk involved. But because of this this container, like you were saying, this tender containment, um, it feels like it's more of an invitation to really allow myself to feel whatever needs to come through and move through me. And I feel like I was able to identify that container and feel its presence there because of this beautiful class that you and I just wrapped up earlier this summer. I feel like I can name what that is, or just sense it, really just sense that I can move within it, and not feel like it's too much of a risk
Mm-hmm.
because I'm protected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear you share with us a little bit about your story, the story of your life, the story of
Sure.
Rebecca the human, Rebecca the artist, Rebecca the magical human,
Mm.
the magical person. And maybe if you could start us off with your sun, moon, rising. That's
Oh my
always a nice
gosh.
place to start. Yeah.
It is a nice place to start. And I laugh a little bit because I've been in this journey with not really identifying or feeling like I don't identify with my sun specifically, which is Sagittarius.
Mm.
So I'm a
Mm-hmm.
Sagittarius sun. I'm a Cancer rising and a Leo moon.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like in my earlier years, as a child, before, you know, parenting, before my parents started to parent in the way that they did, I was a Sagittarius sun, like very outgoing and just wanted to be around people, and was very, just couldn't sit still. I was exploring constantly and just letting my imagination direct me. And then now, as an adult, I feel like I definitely have tapped into my Cancer rising. I'm very sensitive and attuned to other people's energies, and the very like typical Cancer archetype. And then the Leo moon is there, and that one's kind of my more I'm exploring that one a little bit more, because I know I'm a Leo moon, but I'm more of a quiet, confident, like really wants attention Leo moon, you know? So
I love that.
Even saying that is a big step for me, but people in my direct circle know that that's a thing about me. So, but yeah, so I'm those are my sun, moon, and rising signs. So yeah, I am a daughter of immigrants. My parents came here from Mexico and Peru, and I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood here in Michigan, West Michigan, and I didn't have like the best childhood. It was very filled with a lot of like substance abuse from my dad. He was an alcoholic. And then I didn't feel like I really fit in. And I think that a lot of us who are first generation kids kind of have that feeling of like, we don't really know where we fit in. We don't really know if we're, part of our culture, but then we're also like immersed in this culture with dominant culture. And I just always kind of felt like I was in between. And so that really shaped a lot of who I was, and that's like who I'm like coming back to and remembering, is that little Rebecca who was trying to find her way. And then over time, as my parents were dealing with their direct hardships, they start to parent in a way where they want you to just kind of fit in. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of minimizing of your essence and diminishing of your essence. And it's not like it was ill-intended. It was just a way to acclimate and to not stick out.
For efficiency's sake.
And survival. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my story is coming back to that and visiting those parts of myself that were vibrant and fun-loving and joyful and really creative. So I did most of my, that was my like immediate childhood. And then I went into college, and I always think this is such an interesting part of my story, that I never thought I was an artist. I lived with one of my roommates, was an artist, and the artist in the very like basic definition that I had in my head, where you could paint, you could sculpt, you could do all of these like really artist-like things. And I remember feeling kind of like missing out or envious or jealous, and not really feeling like that was in me. But I always had a really good sense of style. Like I always got a lot of compliments on my clothing, but at that time I didn't really see that as a form of artistic expression, right? Like now I see that as like, I am the canvas, and the way that I dress is a reflection of that inner landscape, right? And there's a lot of different landscapes. So as I, graduated from college, I moved to the east side of the state, Metro Detroit, and that was a whole other experience for me. And then I moved to LA. So when I moved to LA, that's really where I really came into learning about how I express myself through art. So I, took jewelry classes, was one of the first ones that I always was drawn to. I took pottery classes, and I went to interior design. I forget what it's called, but it's through UCLA, extension courses. I did that, and I really just came into myself and really felt like I was an artist, and I started to identify as an artist, and it felt really liberating. In conjunction with that, I also found 12-step groups to help heal those parts of myself that were directly impacted by people who struggled with alcoholism. So I joined a 12-step group for families and loved ones who are affected by those who drink. And I did that for like 10 years. I was in 12-step groups for 10 years. So that, in conjunction with, finding this expression of myself through the lens of an artist, was really profound, and really is what, like, I saw exponential growth.
Yeah.
But at the same time, LA was not for me. And now understanding the energetics and energy and really being able to put language to that, it was too overstimulating for my nervous system, specifically because I was in the midst of some deep, deep healing and peeling back of shedding layers, like from a lot of trauma in my life. When you grow up in consistent trauma,
right,
it is really hard to know what's in your body, to even know, like, to express and extrapolate, like, what is it that I was feeling. So all of the noise and the unpredictability of people's schedules, and the constant moving, because that's kind of how it was when you live in, or at that time, trying to find a place that you could actually afford. So it was very much unstable for me. And I grew up with a lot of unpredictability and instability. So that was just a constant reactivation.
Right.
So that was an interesting thing to notice after I came back from LA. But I did meet my husband there. So yeah. I definitely feel like, when you look back on your life and you start to see all of the magical threads and how they connect. I met my husband there. We both worked at Trader Joe's at the time in Silver Lake, and we met there. We fell in love. We were both in really long-term relationships, like 10 and 12 years.
Wow.
And we both left those relationships, and we got together, and we've been together ever since. And that was back in 2011. And tomorrow's actually our anniversary. So that feels kind of nice to talk about that right now.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. So, yeah, we both realized that we needed a change. So we explored, his parents lived just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. We explored Nashville, Tennessee. And then Michigan was not on our list, but we came back here to meet my family. And now we're here in Michigan, and it feels like this is where I'm supposed to be. Like when we talk about in Marika's class about the land as an original ancestor and developing that intimacy with the land, I've always been so drawn to the western coast of Michigan. There's something about this land that feels very magical. And there's parts of this state that are just incredible, and it feels like home to me. And it is like home. It is my home, but a lot of times, like, people may not say that where they grew up or the land that held them doesn't feel like where they're supposed to be. And this is where I feel like I'm supposed to be right now. And I've been here for over 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. There's something that I really love from hearing your story, knowing that you're a Cancer rising and knowing that in traditional astrology, your chart is ruled by the moon, right? There's
Mm,
something about movement because the moon is the fastest moving object in the chart,
mm,
right? In
mm,
astrology.
mhm,
And so I love hearing how LA for you was this transitory point, right? Which the
mhm.
moon often speaks to transitions. It often speaks to movements. It often
That's right.
speaks to the constant changing nature of reality. And I love how that was where you met yourself as an artist and also
Hmm.
where you met um your partner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know that that's really cool that you identified it like that you pointed that out because that does feel very true to me.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, and just thinking about how we're actually opposite. So he is a Leo sun and a Sagittarius moon.
Oh.
And we have the opposite sun and moon signs.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so grateful for that, for having gone to LA for all of those reasons. And now it just feels like I'm on this continual journey of defining like what artistry looks like for me right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I've essentially um, like know that I like to work with my hands. So I use a lot of wax to create my pieces, and that feels like something that is I like the idea. I like working with wax because it's malleable, it's formable, it's imperfect, it's something that kind of takes on its own spirit, and um, there isn't a lot of refinement to it. And that's like what I feel like as my in my childhood, there was this idea of having to be perfect because I
Mhm.
didn't want people to notice my family, or if they did, but look at me, I'm like, getting my shit together. I'm, doing well in school and I'm super outgoing. So there was this like level of like trying to attain this refinement. Um, so working with wax allows me to kind of heal that part of me that's aspired to be a very refined version of myself that never felt like it was in alignment with who I really am.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I also love just reading your website, Rebecca. There was something very. mm, I feel, first of all, I want to name that it's incredible when I look at your list of teachers. It sounds like you have done a lot in
Mm,
like the you've been around in the healing world.
mm,
You've studied with a lot
mm,
of different teachers. I also noticed this really beautiful acknowledgement of how you're not just an individual. That is so explicit on your website. You
mhm.
had this beautiful list of essentially your ecosystem, I would say.
Right.
You mentioned the elemental aspect of it, your bloodline, your family, your culture, your connection with cosmos, cosmic bodies,
Mhm.
your chosen family, your friends, your children, your sacred flame, like the inner sacred flame you mentioned,
Mhm.
which
Which
is
is a thing from Nicole.
a
I was
thing
very
from
explicit to
Nicole.
make sure to name my people because,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yes, I'm curious to hear more about your process, I suppose, in
Hmm.
terms of making art, because it sounds like you are aware of all the things that came into the artistic
Hmm.
process, including your relationships.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I don't think I've ever really explored like how to like verbalize how all of those things inform my process. it just is me. Like all of those things, I am those things, and those things are me. And so anything that comes out of that, like anything that comes through me, is just inherently all of those other things that make up that tapestry, right? I I feel like I have to mention this first, that I mentioned earlier that I was in 12 step work for many years, 10 years prior to these teachers, because all of those list of teachers is in the last 2 years, like, or last since 2019. So I've done a lot of, I've kind of pivoted. Like I stopped going to the 12 step groups because I felt like I reached a point. It wasn't taking into consideration the intersections of um, what it means to grow up having mixed cultures. It was
Mm.
still very much in a container of dominant culture lens. And it
Yes.
felt like I reached a cap there. And I knew that in my soul. I met some incredible people, amazing people, but I couldn't do it anymore. So that's when my very first teacher, that is Dr. Frantonia, she was the one who really like just cracked me so far open. And she had a group of other teachers, like a panel of teachers that were in this cohort called The Evil Behind Your Love and Light. And that was just the beginning of it. So, and from there, Marika's class is the one that has really, really shown me how interconnected we really are.
Hmm.
Like I've always known that in my spirit, but gave me the space to practice that and feel that in my body, and just be able to make those connections and explore what it means to have non-human kin
Hmm.
ancestors.
Yeah.
Explore what it means to have galactic ancestors.
Hmm.
A lot of different like frameworks that um, not is not something that you can be in conversation with just anybody. So I felt like a very safe space to do that. And so in that time frame between 2020 and where we are now, I created this Altar Companions collection. And this is where I um, was very specific that I wanted to work specifically with wax and only use heating elements and tools to help give these pieces texture. And so in this Altar Companions collection, I have a candle snuffer, a divination card holder, and a candle holder. And I wanted to make these pieces because we were in a very dark place globally in 2020.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I was also in a very dark place, specifically with my family, with health concerns around my son. And I felt like I didn't know what to do with that. Like I knew I needed to create something, but I just didn't know. I didn't want to make a beautiful pair of earrings. That didn't feel significant enough for me. I wanted to make something that had more of a that was more of a bridge, a
Yeah.
bridge to connecting deeper with my spiritual team, which was a very new concept for me. It was very new, sitting down at the altar, an altar that I just created, like in 2019, had not had one before that. Sitting down there and trying to call in your elevated ancestors and teams felt so it just felt very different, but I also knew that it was something I had to do. I didn't have a choice. I needed to cultivate that relationship then and there. And so having these tools felt like companions that were there with me, that were taking in the medicine, giving me the medicine, holding space for me while I
Hmm.
fumbled my way through like fortifying these relationships, right? Because as somebody who is still exploring what my clairs are, clairaudience, sentience, all of the clairs, the five clairs, I always knew that I could feel things, goosebump wise, but to not have like a voice or a vision was really hard for me in the beginning to feel like I was connecting. So having like these tools available were ultimately my companions, which is why I named them that.
Yeah.
So when I did this collection, I just let myself just fall into the process. I would always do a little ritual to kind of circle back to your question of my process. With this specific collection, I was very intentional about clearing the energy in the room, clearing my energetic field, calling in my honorable, well-heeled, and elevated spirit guides and ancestors, using, smoke medicine that's linked to my Peruvian ancestry, and just let myself create. And I had a general idea of the three things that I wanted to do, but I just let myself create. And it was amazing to me how fast it happened. Like I made these pieces rather quickly, which is kind of how I work in general. I don't conceptualize, I don't draw anything out. I just let things just kind of, usually the materials will kind of inform me and instruct me. But I did want to make sure that I had like some elemental components in there. So, when I felt like I wanted to have like a water component to my pieces, I just kind of let the tools show me how they wanted to be used. And so that was like really cool experience to develop a relationship with my actual tools, right? And using them in a different way that maybe they weren't intended to be used that way. And yeah, I was basically channeling, and I know that can sound a little bit like, oh my gosh, like, oh, you're channeling, but that's essentially what it is. I think that all of us have that artist within us. And once we connect to that, and then we start thinking about how we are part of a bigger, weaved, beautiful constellation, and you open yourself up to that, you automatically become a conduit. And that's what I was. So when I was done and I had my wax pieces, I was just really blown away at my willingness to try and just let myself explore so freely,
Yes. Oh my goodness. I feel like that was just, you were in that space of transmission, and I could really feel your process in even just you describing it. And I love that so much. And I feel like, it's incredible how these conversations to me always happen exactly when we need them to happen. And I'm beginning to also, as a creator of these conversations, to relinquish control and also to be in that space of receiving, because that's precisely that message felt like it was very personal to me. I've been feeling a call to return back to creating music. And what you shared with me felt so appropriate and so right on time, because I think what has been challenging for me in my artistic process and creation process is in maybe not calling in my whole support team, right? Or almost like the support team is always there, but can I bring in the awareness? What I hear from you is that not only are you infusing your pieces now with intention, but you're infusing your process with intention.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. I'd love for you to explore that for yourself.
Yeah.
And see what comes through for you, because I didn't really realize that I was doing that until now I'm speaking it out loud. I mean, I was like setting an intention for the process, which, yes, it does infuse the actual, end result with that. But the tools and everything, like I'm that's all coming to me now after having created this collection, that is what I was doing. and
Yeah.
it was unbeknownst to me at the time. But that's where the magic is when you create things, like when you open yourself up in that way, and then when you're able to look back upon it and tell its story, that's where, that process almost reveals itself to you at a later time. Like the story reveals itself to you at a later time when you have more experience, when you have more, because you're not the same person that you were when you were creating that thing.
Absolutely.
So there's more wisdom in the looking back at your process and the beautiful, things that you've created and that came through you.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of praxis in my field, and something that I heard from when you were speaking is how creativity is innately a praxis. Like creative work can't be theorized first and then you do the thing. It starts with a prospective thought, right? Or maybe like a bit of a hypothesis, even an open, inviting hypothesis. And then it leads us into action, and then we reflect on the action, and then we tweak the action, right? But it creates this cyclical process, which I think often is not reflected in our Western education system. Because we are taught that it's like this one-way train, of like learn the thing, take the exam, practice the thing, and then you're good to go, right? And I love how you're bringing it to this idea of how it's a constant way of looking at it, how it's maybe action first, not being stuck in that perspective that it has to be something that you knew beforehand, and I think this is what's interesting too, because I personally have been untangling, not that I was ever really into it, but I was never big on like ceremonial magic. I always find myself more drawn to like magic that happens in the moment, that's co-created in the moment. And I think part of it too is because that more ceremonial, procedural magic feels very much a reinforcing of like what we already see in the dominant culture,
I'm gonna sit with that. I like that.
Yeah.
There's something else that was coming to me as you were saying that was that we also, like in creating our things as artists, that what comes through is also like creates a ripple, right? Like it so for you, for your music and any other way that you express yourself artistically or creatively, and for me, it's a lot of tangibles right now. And not for me, I have to not have it's like once I create the thing, I'm just going to grab it. I have to use my hands. Once I create the thing, like that's it. Like let go, go fly, go be with whoever is drawn to you. And then it's almost like it's a constant rebirthing. It's like I'm birthing out the thing. And yes, it's rebirthing in a way where I'm trusting that whoever invites these pieces into their home is going to use them in a way that is in their greatest alignment. And that there's no longer like a cord attached to that anymore. So I remember in my earlier days when I would make things, I would be so worried if people would like them. And if I got any kind of like feedback, it would just wreck me. And I would take it so personally, and then start to go down that spiral of like, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, the imposter syndrome kind of shit. But there's something about after creating this collection, I'm just like, I don't have that story anymore. I don't tell myself that story anymore. It's like whatever comes through me it's like a chapter in the like the arc. Like I can't have it like stay like tied to me in any way, because I'm not that same person. It's like now I'm on to the next thing. And um, I see more of a visual than I am able to like explain with my words.
Yeah.
But it's like these, like my body is now here, and then it keeps extending outward and outward and outward. And what I created back here is gone, and it's doing its thing, and it's working its magic with the people who were drawn to it,
Yeah. 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 It brings me to this idea of the artist as a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
The artist, the human, is the vessel through which the creative forces wanted to move through, right? And we're essentially just helping birth this piece from one shape to another, right?
Yeah.
From the perhaps unformed into the formed, and that's it. That's the extent of our role. Yeah, and I think that's where the spiritual support and the spiritual connection that you were mentioning earlier can really come into play, because then we realize that we, the vessel, is taken care of by that support team, that invisible support team, rather than feeling, I guess for me, it's interesting because you mentioned something, Rebecca, earlier about the 12-step program and how you kind of hit a limit. And for me too, this idea of like the self-reliant artist, kind of this figure who is like a total visionary on, at the top of the mountain by themselves, right? Doesn't care about what other people think, never really worked for me. I mean, I always liked the idea of it, right? Because it's very romantic. It's very Beethovenian, but it never really worked. That idea of just like the person working by themselves doesn't really work. And I think something you are pointing out here is that even when we work alone, from a human perspective, we are always calling in our ecosystem. We're always influenced and we're always supported. We're always in this web of support. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And I want more people to explore that for themselves. Like I know that we are 2020 in the pandemic, at least for myself, really called me into examining all of my spiritual practice, my non-existent spiritual practices, and realize like, oh shit, I need some kind of support here. But when you feel so disconnected from your culture and, you're working through remembering yourself and reconnecting with those, parts of yourself that got left behind or that you placed away somewhere to keep safe, it's really hard to do. And I feel so grateful that I turned to the virtual space. I feel grateful, and also I realize that there's a lot of privilege in saying that as well, that I had the time and I had the resources to tap into these virtual spaces. Because once I did leave that 12-step program, I mean, a lot of my foundation was, I intentionally, it was removed. Like that wasn't a support system for me anymore. So I had to create something new for myself. And now, almost 2.5 years later, it feels, I have more of a sense of it, but it's still, I think it's just, for me, I'll never fully grasp the amount of support that I have. Like it's always going to feel like bigger than me, because it is.
Yeah.
And I can rest in that, knowing that I don't have to understand it all. Like I know that I can just lean into it and call on it and rely on my senses and check in with my body to feel closely connected to that team, even though it's not, like it's not like you're calling your friends over to have, hold space for you and eat popcorn or something. It's something that like I have to be more disciplined. And that's the other thing too. There's like this idea about discipline and devotion that I've been kind of exploring. Like, what is discipline? Doesn't really feel good for me to kind of look at my practice as a discipline thing, but I also know that it's required. There's like a devotion. I feel like devotion feels more of like a word for me that I can invite in a little more easily without resistance than the discipline.
Yeah.
And that's being asked of me right now, like to really get very clear on what my devotion to my practice is. Especially because we're not in that class anymore where every Friday we were meeting, and that was like my way of having some type of devotion to the practice. And now it's kind of more free flowing, and I'm just leaving space for seeing what that looks like now, especially because I'm in this grief portal now, which is a whole other side of my experience right now. And how am I creating while in grief is creating even something that I want to use as a tool to move through my grief. This is a whole different aspect of being a creative person that I'm exploring right now.
Yeah.
And perhaps my creativity is not something that I'm meant to use to produce something. I think it's going to be more of a experience with other people, experience with grief itself, just really exploring grief itself in creative ways that aren't ways that we've been told that we're supposed to experience grief.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to explore that if that feels exciting to you. Yeah, because I know you told me and also your Instagram friends that your mom suddenly passed away. And I'm first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I know, I think we all know how hard it feels, at least on a conceptual level or from our previous experience, when someone so close to us passed away. But it's like there's nothing that can prepare us for the actual experience, you know? And it sounds like it was a really profound portal for you to be, I don't know if moving through is even the right word for it, but it's really like to be hanging out in, And, and I'm curious to hear what's been alive for you, what's been moving through you, and what's been shifting within you since your mom passed away.
Yeah.
And what's
Thank you,
your mom's name?
Maria. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, like you said, she passed away suddenly in July. And I will say that I feel like the container that Marika held in her energetic ecology course instantly came into was just magnified for me. Like I was super in touch with what my body was feeling in that moment that I received the news. And I was very calm. And I am feeling like this portal that I find myself in. And I like that you said that it's not really moving through, because it's not. It's more like exploring all of its edges, just really getting very intimate with what that feels like. And there was through one of our peers in that course, Clara, she recommended a book to me. Or she didn't recommend a book. She recommended a person to me. Her name is Oceana Sawyer, and she is an end-of-life doula. And through exploring the work of Oceana, I discovered that she wrote a book called Life, Death, Grief, and the Possibility of Pleasure. And it's just a little book, but oh my goodness, has this book really shifted the way that I show up to grief through pleasure. And this has just expanded everything for me. And I would have never thought that grief and pleasure go together. And they do, they absolutely do. And what's coming alive for me right now is that I'm feeling very called to end of life doula work. And that's been like a very like, woo, like pivot, like I just couldn't believe that, like, I was feeling this pull. I'm absolutely terrified of death. I know we don't talk about it in the ways that I really wish that more of us would in Western culture.
Yeah.
But I know that I just am so laser focused that this is a direction that I need to explore. And so I've never felt so terrified and fascinated and intrigued by something in my life. So just even holding those different emotions and attractions at the same time feels exciting and creative to me, because I know that this work is needed. I think that, I see, and I may have mentioned this somewhere in my feed, or I've talked about it enough now. I feel like that the way that we come into this world and the way that we depart, and the environments that we're in really speak volumes, and
Yeah.
I am a very big advocate for birth doulas. And I actually thought that I wanted to be a birth doula for a while, but then that never really felt completely true for me. But now I realize that I was just on the other side of the arc, that I think that I'm supposed to be on this other side here.
Yeah.
So
powerful.
Exploring that has been just really powerful for me. And then also too, like, using my clairs and the work that we've done in with energy. And then as an artist, I feel like there's something there for me to offer the active dying and the actively dying and their loved ones and family members. I know that, like, we need to create more spaces for people to to be with their grief. And if there's somebody there that can take care of like logistics and things like that, like an end of life doula would, then that allows people to actually sit with what they're experiencing in those moments.
Yeah.
So that's just been, like, for me, I've been deep in this grief portal, and it feels so strange to say that it's exciting, because again, that's not something that we have been taught to associate grief with. But I know that that's like how I'm feeling. I'm very excited to explore this path. And there's a lot of other divine connections with how I came to this path and the specific training program that I will take, that I'll share someday on my Instagram. But it's almost like these divine synchronicities were so overt that I just was like, oh my God, I have to do this. Like, this is not, this is coming through me again. So this is kind of like I'm the vessel.
Yes.
It feels like an I'm the vessel path moment for me.
Wow. I'm really excited to reconnect with you after the program ends and see where you land.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I'm curious if this feels like something you would like to share. What has your, I don't even know if the word practice is the right word for it, but what has exploring grief and its connection to pleasure and its connection to aliveness, what has it looked like for you?
Yeah. So one thing I noticed early on in reading this book, but I was just noticing what was happening to me, that when I first of all, I was very like acutely aware of my energy input and output. I've been very acutely aware of that since my mom passed away, since she died. And I knew that I wasn't going to give if I had nothing to give.
Mm-hmm.
I also knew that there were times where if there was more space in my field, that I could hold the multiple realities of other people in my community who were going through hardships. So I could check in with them and receive whatever they were, feeling they wanted to share with me. And I noticed that some people didn't know how to show up to that. They didn't know how to respond when I was checking in on one of their things. Like, oh, well, you don't, like some of the responses from people were like, I know that you're going through a hard time. Like, I'm okay. You don't need to worry about me. And I'm just like, I had to, be very clear with some of them about like, if I didn't have the capacity to check in, I wouldn't have,
Yeah.
So that's been kind of an interesting thing that I noticed about myself, that I can still hold other realities in addition to my own when I am aware of how much spaciousness exists within me in that time, at that moment. So I was noticing that when I would spend time in community with people, enjoying myself and feeling joyful and, elevating pleasure, and in the smallest of ways. It's nothing grandiose. It's just in the smallest of ways, like shifting to the next, like Oceana says in her book, like what can make that experience just a little bit better for you. So after I would be in community with my people, the next day I was completely wiped out. And so I remember thinking like, oh, did I overdo it? Should I have not gone and done that thing?
Yeah.
And I've learned through this book that like by expanding your capacity for pleasure, you expand your capacity for grief. So it was almost like this weave, that this wave that was happening where, I'd feel like I was spreading myself open and receiving all the love and abundance and joy. And then the next day I was so deep in my grief, but I was going to a deeper level of my grief. And that's what I thought was really interesting. And I shared that with somebody on Instagram, a friend of mine, and she came back, I think it was Julia from our class, and she said something about how that's kind of what happens, that like once you expand in this way, like you dive deeper into your grief. So that's one thing that I've been, now that I'm aware of that, I have things in place where, if I know that I've had a really big day with my people, the next day I kind of not prepare for a deeper grief journey, but I'm just aware of that and I hold that, I have an altar for my mom. So there's like little pleasure points there that I absolutely love. I have little rituals that I do for her and myself. There's a lot of pleasure in doing this grief experience with my son. And that's been a whole other beautiful, wild, painful experience altogether. He's also been such a teacher for me on how to allow myself to feel the depths of that loss and pain and grief. And I would have never thought that that was possible. I think I shared something about that about my son, how the way that he holds the space for me to be in my feelings. And we're very honest with him. Like I don't hide anything about this process from him. What I do is I explain it to him. I feel my feelings, and then I let him know that he's safe. That I'm not crying or I'm not upset because of you. This is, we're just very open about that. And not once did I ever think that that was not the way to do it. It just, again, like that's another thing that I felt was like coming through me through like ancestors, like all lining up behind me to help me navigate that journey with a 5.5-year-old,
Yeah.
you know? So that's been beautiful too. And then my husband and I don't know if you know this, but he lost his best friend in April. And so we're both kind of
Wow.
exploring this grief portal together and finding ways to expand the container that our relationship is in. We're like pushing out of that and exploring all of those edges and all of those like little, you know, tiny pathways that come out that, you know, go outside of that. Like I have this like vision that we are in this container, but then together we like poke our heads out, and then there's this whole other world that we haven't explored together, and that's like
Right.
where we are,
Right.
you know. And it feels really how do I describe this? Like it almost feels like a little bit like there's some risk involved, because these types of tragic events or hardships can be the demise of partnerships, you know?
Absolutely.
So that's another thing, that we're not trepidatious about it, but I'm surprised at how, and well is not even, I love the way that we've been showing up to this together, you know? And it's really, I see him differently. I know that he sees me differently. And just when I thought you know so much about a person, you know, life events happen, and you're surprised with this beautiful, you know, pieces of somebody that you've spent so many years of your life with. And I think that we're surprising ourselves also, you know. It's like, what is a delight, what I'm delighted to see or not delighted to see about myself is also something that like he is witnessing me in that as well.
I can feel my heart cracking and I can hear the sound of my heart cracking as you're speaking. It brings me to this idea. I don't even know who said it first, but this idea that we're really just here to bring each other home, to walk each other home. That. I think there's such deep truth to how you are living this with your husband and with your son, because first of all, for your son, what a gift. What a gift, you know, to be able to hold space for your mother without thinking that it's your fault. Truly, exactly. How many of us actually have that experience?
Right. Without taking that on.
Yeah.
And internalizing that and having it stored somewhere in our body that then we're dealing with in our later years, you know?
Yeah. And rather it becomes this, it just keeps taking me back to like the little I know about your chart, you know, being a Cancer rising ruled by the moon in Leo. There is something about showing that is really powerful, right? How do you show emotions in a way that is healing, that is nurturing, that is caring through displays of authenticity, right? And it's a practice, because it's not, it can't be taken for granted, especially in intense moments, because so much of our culture and so much of our upbringing has to do with shoving away that part of us.
Right. And that's the thing that, like, in the way that we parent him overall, you know, that already feels like I've been assigned the task, the sacred responsibility of breaking those generational patterns. And I take that on, and I take that very, very seriously. Grief was never like even in my sphere of like how to parent in that, you know, because I just didn't think that this would be like where we are. But I also feel like this is such a, like, it's like, it feels really, like when a seed is just blossomed, you know, like when something just pokes out from the soil and it just feels so, fragile, and it just feels like a very instrumental, powerful time in our like cluster family line right now. Like this grief portal that we're all in right now feels so like high stakes, in a way of where it's like we have a lot of opportunity here to undo a lot of our bloodlines patterning from my husband's side and from my side. And we're really just, we don't know what we're doing, but we feel like we're being guided again, that bigger ecosystem, like it's coming through me. And I know that, like, I know that when I choose to tell him this, or when I choose to show him that and be authentic in my expression, specifically around grief, because that, it just really hits you. I mean, it can be any second, and then you get that wave of grief. And I'm intentional about not repressing that. So I have to also be very intentional about what I say to him in those moments, when I show him those parts that exist within me, because that is part of the human existence, the human experience. And I want him to know that he can be all of those things in front of us, and that he will always be safe. He will always be safe, you know? And for me, like, I went to a lot of funerals as a young child. Like, I feel like so many people were dying in my family, and I just was brought to these places and no one explained anything to me. And I could feel it. I could feel that feeling. I had no words for it, but I could feel a sorrow. I could feel a sadness. I could feel everyone was like hyper vigilant and on edge, but no one was saying anything to me about it.
Yeah.
And the minute my mom died, like, I knew exactly what I needed to say to my son. And I knew how I was going to approach this. And again, like, that felt to me like very divinely orchestrated and instructed.
Wow, it's so powerful. I'm feeling like tears welling up.
I know, me too.
Wow. Thank you, Rebecca. That was a gift. That was a gift. And I think also, as someone who grew up socialized masculine, what a powerful permissioning. It reminds me of this piece in Brene Brown's book where I don't know if you ever knew about this part of because she shared it in quite a lot of different places, but she shared that once she had been doing a study on vulnerability and shame for some time, and most of her subjects were women. And then one time at a book signing event, this man came up to her and say, how convenient that you only talk about the women, or you only study the women, because, you know, my daughter and my wife would rather me die than see me cry in front of them.
Wow.
So he was like, do you know the power of that shame that has been assigned to masculinized humans with regards to feeling their feelings and feeling the complexity of their humanity.
Right.
And I love this image of you and your husband kind of peeking out of the box, because I do think that that's where we're invited to meet our humanity, right? At the edges of our experiences.
Right. I do. And never before have I been able to like feel that and know that to be true. You know, I grew up with a lot of hardship as a child, and there's definitely a lot of grief in that as well. But I didn't know how to dance with that grief.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that a lot of that is showing up with this grief as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I am in a place now where I'm exploring these edges. I have the language, I've had the experience, I've had the privilege of studying with people and have the teachers to help show me the way. Now that this big loss has happened, all of these little griefs are right behind it because they want to be seen.
Absolutely.
They want to be tended to. So it's almost like it's amplified and it's compounded. However, it's not going to consume me because I know that I'm in the place, like the portal opened up in the place and time that it was supposed to. I was ready to feel it and be with it and navigate it. And so all of those other little griefs that didn't get to be seen showed up with it.
Yeah.
You know, so my dreams have been so wild. And that's how I know that that's what's happening. I'm dreaming of people that I once loved and didn't grieve those relationships. You know, I'm dreaming of all of these little griefs that took place in my life that I didn't give space for, you know. But I feel like my body and my spirit and my heart is ready to at least acknowledge them. And maybe not, if I'm not actually dealing with them directly, like I'm saying to them, like, I see you and you can come through. But I also have boundaries within that too, because right now I'm dealing with this one.
Yeah.
But I see you. Like you feel safe enough to come through and I see you. And we'll get there, you know? Yeah. And so I feel like, you know, my mom's departure, although it's really, really sudden, it is such a gift.
Yeah.
It's such a gift. And I know that, like, I believe that she did consent to leaving at this time. And now I'm here left to navigate what that looks like in a bigger picture.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And help, like, my family. And fight in grief and sadness in a way that, like, my family didn't know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it shows up in the body, and it shows up in all of these, like, sideways ways. And, like, I feel like her death has been such an invitation to heal so much in my bloodline.
Yeah.
So much in my bloodline. You know, I have 3 sisters, so that's a whole other, like, dynamic, you know, but I'm so proud of the way that we have shown up to this as a sisterhood, because these situations can tear people apart.
Yes, absolutely. And they do all the time.
And they do all the time. So, like, what we tell my mom, you know, when we voice out to her, like, Mom, trust us, let us show you all the hard work that you've done, all that you've given to us. Let us show you that we're going to be okay. Like, we're going to figure out your earthly things with your state and everything. And let us show you that, like, we are you, we are embodying you, and we're going to stay close. Like, and if anything, we are just, like, I'm seeing parts of my sisters that I haven't ever seen before. Like, I've been holding them in these little boxes of who I thought they were. And now it's like we're all showing up to this as, like, we don't know what just happened, but, like, this is all we have. Like, we need to we need to be here for each other in all the ways and show up to our grief and feel safe to show up in our grief, however it shows up. There's no judgment. Even though there have been times where, we get frustrated when we have to talk about like these, estate matters.
Yeah.
We can't just grieve in an indigenous cultural way anymore. Like we have to jump through these hoops of a westernized world.
Yeah.
But I also feel like all of my years in 12-step prepared me for how to, deal with more of the business matters in a way that feels like everyone has a voice.
I love that. I really was just going to say that in many ways, those many years that you've spent in 12-step was the precursor to this. Yeah.
I do feel that. I really, really do.
And it was also perhaps the first portal to saying that I am going to change the narrative of my ancestral lineage. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct. And I have been able to connect that thread in the, my constellation. Like I've been able to connect that. And so to hear you say that is very affirming, because like I'm no longer in 12-step, and it served its purpose. And now, oh my God, when you look back at your life and you just see all those threads, it's really fascinating to me. And this has been another gift where I'm just like, oh my God, that little tiny shift brought me here, and it feels so magical and magical. I know it gets used all the time, but I don't know what other word to describe it. It really does.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. This has been such an incredible conversation. I feel like, just in you allowing yourself and me also to show up in this space as our full human selves, it has been such a powerful, I don't know. This feels really powerful to me. I don't even have words for it right now, but other than gratitude, just full-hearted gratitude. Thank you.
I feel the same. And I'm reflecting that back to you. It does feel that way. Like we were in our own little portal. That's what my friends and I call it when we go to a place where it's like, we're in a portal.
We're in a portal. Absolutely. I want to ask you, actually, I feel like you've kind of maybe alluded to it, but I'm curious to hear you share even briefly, what has been the most surprising thing for you that you've discovered about yourself through this process of grieving?
Surprising. The thing that's been the most surprising for me, and I talk about this with my therapist because I'm like, am I doing something wrong? I haven't felt any regret or guilt. And maybe it's not to say that it's not coming, but I haven't felt that yet. And I don't think that it will, but I'm very surprised that those are not the emotions and things that have come up for me. And I realize that is not everybody's story. I feel like that is a very rare thing. But I have to attribute it to all of that, like, foundational groundwork that I've laid for myself, and expanding my consciousness and exploring death consciousness and exploring what is possibly happening when you die or when you're actively dying.
Right.
what it means to die, and where does your soul go, and where is your, what happens to your essence. So that's been a really big surprise for me, to see that, like, I'm holding my mom's essence, and the way that I am communicating with her is not through the lens of her human experience. It's through the lens of her essence.
Wow.
Which is really hard at times, because I don't want to project, like, to her what she was here. Because that's part of that was part of her humanness.
Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You have been so generous. And yeah, I'm just massively grateful for you. I would love to talk to you all day long, but I respect your time. And I want to wrap this up. I want us to come to a close. So I would love for you to share any and all the ways that you would love people to connect with you, what your offerings currently look like, or what you have in the pipeline. Yeah, anything you would like to share on the public-facing front.
Yeah. So I'm most active, not super active, on Instagram at Rebecca.MullinsStudio is my handle on Instagram. Not very active on Facebook. You can also go to my website, RebeccaMullinsStudio.com, and that's where I have a lot of my jewelry. I do custom energetic pieces as well. You can read about that. And then my Altered Companions collection, it's feeling aligned to launch that this fall. So you can hop on my newsletter email list for that. And then I'm always checking my DMs on Instagram, so people can connect with me there. I'll probably be going quiet for a little while to start preparing to apply for this end of doula training. I've already started, and the questions are pretty amazing. So I'm, taking my time with that. So
yeah. That's all very exciting. I can't wait to check back with you once you are through that other portal, because I can just feel, as you were sharing this experience, that this is such an important part of what you're here to offer. And that's not to say that you're going to look like a full-time anything, but really how much of this is going into your life, and it's just such an abundance of gifts that will inevitably flow out and find the people who need it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the last question I like to ask all of my guests is, the name of this project is Healing the Spirit. And I'm curious to hear what comes up for you when you hear that. What do you perceive to be the opportunities and the challenges?
Healing the Spirit. To be curious about it, to explore outside of yourself. And the challenges would be that you'll have to face a lot of shadowy parts of yourself. So there's a constant mirror that's being held up to you through your community, through yourself, through your partners, through your children. But it's really asking of you to, like, acknowledge and examine. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. I love that answer, and I love talking with you. This has been such a gift, truly.
It truly has, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for my conversation with Rebecca Mullins. I am so grateful that you were here, and I hope that you received something from that episode, that you were inspired, that something moved through you through this gorgeous transmission that Rebecca shared with all of us. If you found this podcast or this conversation to be challenging you, to be inspiring you, to be moving you in some shape or form, I would love it if you could consider leaving a review. I really love showing up for these conversations. I love sharing them. I dearly feel like it's so important for each of us to listen to each other's stories and to learn something from it. And I really believe that you sharing a review, if you're feeling called to do so, will help others find this conversation. And I also welcome you to connect with Rebecca in all of the ways. I've included all of the links to reach out to Rebecca below. And if you feel this resonance, I recommend that you reach out to Rebecca too and tell her how much this conversation has meant to you. All right, dear friends, I hope that you take good care of yourselves. And until the next time we meet again, I am wishing you well and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for being here.